Hello everyone, I am Siddharthan. This is the ninth topic in our complete Python course where we will be discussing about input statements. So input statements are basically used to get a value or some data from the user. So if you have worked on C programming, we would have used something like scanf, which is again used to get this input from the user. So this input statements are similar to that. So in this video, let's try to understand this input statement from its basic usage to other variations using which we can like kind of work with it depending upon our particular use case. So this is the agenda for today's video and let's get started. So I'm going to do my coding in Jupyter notebook. So you can use this or like any other IDEs or notebooks of your choice. So first I'll make a comment and say this as basic input statements usage. So first, let's see how we can use input statement for a very basic need, which is just to get some value or some data from the user. So here I'm creating a variable called as name, and then you can use the Python keyword input. As you can see, this is green in color, so that means like this is a keyword in Python. So within this input parenthesis, we have to mention some string. So here I'll say enter your name. So here we are basically prompting the user to give their name in this input box that we would create, and then we are going to print their name something like hello, put a comma and space, and then we are going to concatenate this their name and again concatenate it with, let's say, an exclamatory mark. Okay, so here we are basically joining three parts of a string. So first is hello comma space and then the name that the user is going to provide, and finally an exclamatory mark. So I'll run this by pressing shift plus enter, or even you can run this from here. So that's going to ask for the name. So here let's say I'm saying Sid and I'm pressing enter. So it would say hello Sid. If you want to give a different name, you can go ahead and do that. So let's say that we are saying Jane, and it's going to say hello Jane. So this is how we can get input from the user using this input statement. And here you can just like mention what you are expecting. So here I want the user to give the name, so here I'm saying that enter your name, and in the box that displayed here they can type in the name, and using that particular input that we are getting from them, we can just like print that or do some operations on this and so on. So this is how we can use input statement for getting this input. And a very main aspect that we have to understand here is the data type of the data that you are getting here. So here the user is typing in something, right? So here they are typing in their name and we are getting that and printing that. Now let's see what's the data type is. In order to find what the data type is, you can pass this variable name within this type keyword in Python. So you would just say type open and close parenthesis, and within that pass your variable, that is name in this case, and it would say it is a string. So that's why we were able to concatenate it with other strings. So this is a very important aspect. That's because not just for name, even if it's an integer, that's going to be considered as a string. So we need to understand this. And maybe before that, if you're like completely new to Python or programming, I'll just tell you what is meant by this data type. So each data has its own type. So let's consider a value called value like 25. So this is an integer value. So let's say that there is a value of 25.5. This is a decimal value. There is a word called as English or something, which we would put in quotes, and this is a string. So similarly, we have several data types, and this text that we are seeing is basically a string. Now, what would happen is, let's say I'm creating a variable as age and saying that input uh, enter your age, putting a colon, and then I'm printing this age like saying age colon space let's say comma age. Let's run this. So here the user has to give their age, which is, of course, we know that age should be integer values, right? Or basically numbers. So I'll say 25 and press enter. So it's going to print this. But even though this is an integer, whenever we use an input, that's going to consider this as a string. So I'll show this to you. Again, type the word type, and then within this pass the parameter age, the variable age that we have created. So now run this. So even though this is an integer value, that is considered as a string. So this is about this input statement. So even though you provide a string value or an integer value or a decimal value, that's always going to consider it as a string. So it can be 25 or 25.5 as we have seen. So all these even numerical values will be considered as string. So that's about this input statement. So it's okay if you have no idea about these data types. We will eventually discuss about the data types like integers, decimals, and so on. Just remember that integers, int is basically integers, float is basically your decimals, and strings are nothing but ticks. So now let's say that we want to get the age from the user, but I don't want this to be a string. I want this to be a integer value. So let's see how we can do that. So that would be the second variation that we will be discussing, that is input with integer value. So let's see how we can get this integer value. So here what we would do is we would get the value from the user, but before this step we would just like convert it to an integer. So here I can say age is equal to int, which is the keyword for representing integer values, and within this I can use the input statement, and then I can pass in the string, let's say enter your age, put a colon and give a space. Now I'll print this by saying age colon space, put a comma and age. So it's basically it's going to do the same thing, but we have to look at what's the type is. So let's run this, and for age I'm giving this value as 35, and we have printed this age. So this age value has been stored in this variable called as age, right? So let's find this data type by using this type keyword, and within this pass your age, and that's going to say it is a int, because what happens is the value the user is providing will be basically a string first, and later this string has been converted to an integer using this int keyword. So similarly you can even convert this to a float value. So let's see how we can do that. So it's pretty much similar to this, we only would change this int to float. So this would be input with float value. So let's say that we are considering an example of height of a person, and here instead of int you would say float, which represents your decimal values. So enter your, let's say, height in centimeters, and then here we would say that height is this particular number. So let's run this. So let's say that the height is 175 centimeters. I'm just like providing that value. I'm pressing enter. So it's going to say height is 175.0. As you can see, we didn't have that dot zero first, but this value has been converted to a decimal value, and that has been provided here. If you want to look at the data type, you can just pass in this height parameter, height variable, and it would say it is a float. So this is a, you can, even though you get a string value, you can convert it to an integer value or a floating point value using the corresponding int keyword or the float keyword. The one thing that we have to remember is like this is not possible for all the cases. So you can't like convert a text value to an integer value. You can't like type in something like the name of a person and you can't convert it to an integer or something. So that's going to throw you an error. So we shouldn't like try that, but for valid values, so this conversion can be done. So we will also discuss about this conversions in detail, so how one data type can be converted into another and so on. But for now, for this input statements, you can just remember that. So you just use that same input statement the way you use it for a basic usage, and just like wrap it in a data type that you want, whether it's an integer or a float or like other data types. So even you can, in some cases, right, when you're just like working with a integer value or floating point value, even those can be converted into a string like separately apart from this input statement. Those conversion is also possible. So I hope everyone is clear until this point. So now let's look at some other variations for this. So here we are going to take multiple inputs at once. So here we are going to ask the user for different set of values in the same single line, and then we are going to extract those values. So I'll create two variables here. So name comma age. So we need to pass in two values from the user. So here I'm going to say uh, input, and then we can say something like enter your name and age separated by a comma, or maybe let's start with a space, which is the default separation. So we have these two parameters, name and age. So the user has to kind of provide their name and the age, and then we are kind of mentioning this using the string enter your name and age separated by a space. And after this, maybe I'll just put this colon and space. So I can use this dot split that's going to split the values provided by the user. So the default split is going to be a space, and then I can just print this by saying, so we have already discussed about this f string, which is used to insert variables into strings. So I can say something like name colon and put open and close your parenthesis, and within that you can pass your name, and then age would be this. So once we get the name and age from the user, so that's going to be replaced in this print statement with the name that the user has provided and the age that the user is provided. So this we are achieving this using this f string, which will be used to substitute this set of values from this variable. So let's run this. So the important thing that we have to remember is the values that the user provides should be separated by a space. Okay, so just type in the name of the user, or like basically any name, or the age separated by a space, and don't include anything else. So here let's say I'll say John space age as let's say 30. So I didn't give anything, so John and 30, and press enter. So this has extracted John as the first parameter, and that has been passed to the variable name, and the second value is extracted as 30, is passed to this variable called as age. This is because we have used this split method that's going to split the text that you're providing in the input statement, and the default way of separation is space. So this is not like the only way. You can also use like different custom splits as well. So I'll show you. So let's say that we have like similar example. Let me put this as input with custom separators, and here I can say name comma age comma city is equal to input, enter your name, age and city separated by a comma, put a colon and space. So this is like optional, so this space and colon you can keep it or you can remove it if you want. So the important thing that we have to change here is use dot split method, but within the parenthesis, within the quotes, pass what separation you want. So here we have asked the user to provide a comma in between, right? So here you can use a comma and then print all those things. So use a f string, say name is this. So within this you can pass the parameters. So within the curly braces we have to pass in the parameters we want to insert, in this case which is name, and then we have to pass the age, curly braces age, and then finally the city that they belong to. So city would be within this variable called a city. So the three variables that we have created here should be mentioned within this curly braces for substitution. And the important thing is these values that the user is providing should be separated by a comma. So I'll run this, and here I can say, let's say John comma 30 comma city is like let's say Chennai, press enter, and all these values will be separated, and we would, I mean, and then they would be passed to this name, age, city, and then we would like then insert these values. So make sure that you're doing this consistently, because if you don't split it properly then it's going to give an error. So let's say that we run this and I mentioned this something like John comma 30, and if I just put a space and then say Chennai, so that's going to give a value error, because now it's only separating by this comma. So now it just sees like two set of values. So this is the problem. So whenever there is a comma, it should be only separated by a comma. So let me run this again. So I'll say John 30 comma Chennai. So if you want to use a comma and a space, you can even do that as well. So instead of comma, just put a space, and here you can maybe mention as by a comma and space, so that the user knows how they want to give the value. So here we can say John comma space age 30 comma space Chennai, right? So now this data has been unpacked and we got the value. So this is how you can get multiple values from the user using the default space separation, or even you can like use comma and comma space and so on. So I hope this part is clear. So now let's see how we can get multiple values from the user and create a list out of this. So for that, maybe we can just first try to see how we can create a basic list using a for loop. Again, we will discuss in detail about this using this for loop and so on, but I'll just give you a basic version. So this is like creating a list using for loop. So this we call this as like list comprehension. So I can say numbers list is equal to, or I can just say I for I in range 10. So what would happen is in Python we have a data type called as list, and that would look something like this. Can just use this 5, right? And this list would contain the values like 0 comma 1 comma 2 comma 3 comma 4. So it would contain like first 5 values. So in Python the numbering starts from 0, the indexing starts from 0. So when you say 5 values, so it's going to contain the values from 0, 1, 2, 3, and 4, right? So these are the values that we are getting. So now what would happen is, so a list is nothing but a set of values. So it need not be an integer only or a decimal point only. It basically has a set of values. So those values can be a combination of integers, floating points, and strings, and so on. But it contains like multiple values, and this is what we call as a list. So here you can simply create a list by saying something like this: I for I in range 5. So what it's going to do is take all the values from range 5. So range 5 contains these 5 values: 0, 1, 2, 3, and 4. And then we are going to put all these things in a list using this particular piece of code. So I for I in range 5. So at each iteration it's going to add each of these values to this list, and then you can just print this numbers list. So it's okay if you don't understand this, as I said. So we are going to discuss in detail about this, but just remember that you can just create a list in the single line of code using this list comprehension using this for loop. So now let's say that instead of just creating a fixed set of values, let's say that we want to create this values from the input from the user. So let's see how we can do this. So this part would be input and list comprehension. So this is what we call as list comprehension, the way of creating this list using this for loop thing. And I'll say numbers list is equal to, let's also convert this values. The user is going to provide the input, right? So that's going to consider as an string value. So that's going to be string. So now we have to convert this strings to input, as we have seen in this particular case where we would convert these values to integers or float. So I'm going to convert this integers. So I'll say I for I in input, enter let's say space separated numbers, a colon and space, and use dot split. So just dot split is nothing but it's going to split the values by looking at the space between them. So here what we are doing is, maybe I'll just like run this and I'll show this to you. Finally we can print this as well. So you can just say numbers list, a colon, and you can use this curly braces. You can print your lists as well. So we are going to use this list variable here, and that's going to print that. And let's run this. So here you can give the values like, let's say 10. So it should be separated by space, 20, let's say 40, 50, some random numbers, 80. So we have 5 numbers, and you can create any number of values here and press enter. So basically what happens here is, and these are also not strings, but these are integers as we have converted those here. So at each point, let's say the user is like typing in some values, right? Let's say they are typing in 5 values. So these 5 values are kind of splitted using the split function, and now it's kind of present like this. And then we are passing this to this list comprehension and creating a list using a for loop. So basically what we have done here, so instead of this range 5, we are getting these values from the user. So they can just like type in all the values using a space separated thing, and then we can create a list. Again, this can be a comma separated as we have seen before. So you just have to put this split here. So this is how you can create a list from the input values that the user is sending. So you can do this without this integer as well. Only thing is that it would have been created as string values. Maybe I'll show this to you. I'll just remove this integer I to I. So this I is nothing but the values that the user is typing at each case. So each of these values are converted to integer at like one particular task or one particular iteration of this for loop. So in this case, the for loop would run, let's say, 5 number of times. So if I just remove this and print this list, I'll say 10 space 20 space t space 80 space 70. So we have 5 numbers. So here you can see all these values are present within quotes. That means these are string values because we haven't converted the input from the user into integer values. So these are present just as string values. So this is how you can kind of get this values from the user and just like build a list out of this. So the next variation that we can try is, so this is sixth one, right? Let me put this as sixth one. The next one is like how we can validate a value. So let's say that we are expecting age from the user and then we are going to convert that to an integer, right? But what if they provide name in the age field? So that's not going to work well. So here we are going to use exception handling part where we check if the user is given as like a valid input. So this would be validating the input with error handling. Okay, so this is the task that we are going to say. So for that we can use like two blocks. One is try and the other one is except block. So I'll explain you this. So age is equal to input. So this should be converted to an integer later. So in input, enter your age, and then we can print this something like your age is, open and close your curly braces, put your variable name here and say except value error, print please enter a valid number. So let's try to understand this. But before that, I'll just show you what would happen there. So let's say that we are considering this example of age and we are converting this input that we got from the user into an integer value and then printing this age, right? So I'll run this. So when the user provide values like let's say 50 and press enter, so that's going to convert that value into an integer and it's going to print it. But what if they give something like let's say name of a person where we are expecting a age? So that's going to give a value error because the integer conversion is looking for a valid input to be converted, right? But here they have given this text which is John. So that's what it says. So invalid literal for int with base 10. So which is basically it's expecting an integer value, but we got some text value, not an integer, but a value that can be converted into an integer. It can be 10, 20, 30 or something, some numbers, but it is a text, right? So it's going to raise a value error. So what we are going to do is in the case you got a value error, we are going to say that please enter a valid number. So I'll just like delete this cell and maybe I'll tell you how you can delete a particular cell. So in Jupyter Notebook, if you want to delete this, click somewhere here and outside this cell and press D two times. So that's going to delete that cell. So you can just select it and press D two times. So we have seen, right? So whenever the user is giving a value, that's not like a valid conversion, that's going to raise a value error. So okay, this value error should be V caps and E also should be caps. So let's understand what this try and except block does. So the code first enter this, or interpreter first tries to execute this try block. So this is what we call as try block, and this is within this indentation of 4 spaces, right? So after this colon it will automatically start with a 4 space. So this comes in this try block. So it wants to get the age input from the user, and once they give the age value it's going to print that. But when they give values like John or some person's name or something different that can't be converted into an integer, it's going to raise a value error. And now it won't show you that there is an error. This except block will then run because this has triggered a value error, and it would just say please enter a valid number. So I'll run this and show you. So when I type in a proper convertible age like let's say 50, this try code ran. So this didn't raise any exceptions, right? Exception says it didn't raise any errors. So this except block won't run at all. So you won't see this print statement of print enter, enter a valid number. So when I press this 50 and enter here, it's going to say your age is 50. But when I run this and say the value is John, now this there's going to be error that's raised by this int conversion, that's going to raise a error. And now the except block runs. So only when a error is raised in a code in a try block, your except block will run. And if the error is a value error, we are printing this please enter a valid number. So after this John, I'll press enter and it would say please enter a valid number. So that's coming from line number 6. So this is how you can validate the input that the user is giving using this try and except block. So we call this as error handling. When you're getting a error, we don't just like show a red colored text and say that there is some error in that. So here we are handling the error and providing some insight on what has gone wrong. So if a non-technical person is using your application or something, if they see an error, they don't want technical information, right? So they want why it's not working or why it wouldn't work. So in this case, if they just instead of like looking at properly, they have just like given some name or something and press enter, they must know what went wrong. So here we say that please enter a valid number, so they can understand that they have not provided a valid number. So then they can just provide the value that we are expecting. This is the age, which is a number, and then it would run this. So the main takeaway here is we have two blocks here, try and except, which goes hand in hand. So you cannot like use except without a try block or something like that. So try and except should be there, and the except block code will only run when a error has been raised in the try block. Okay, so if there are no errors, this particular part will be skipped, right? And then value error, only when there is a value error this will run, because we have used the condition as value error. If there are different types of error also, this won't run. So main thing is, when the user has not provided proper input, we are validating it with the except condition, saying that if it's not a valid error, just print the message saying that please enter a valid number. So this is how you can validate the input from the user. So these are all the variations that I wanted to teach you today. So I hope everyone got what we have discussed, and please just try this code. So this will be like helpful for you as a practice. So first we have started with a very basic usage of input, and we understood that whatever the value that the user is giving, even it can be a number, so that's going to be converted into a string. If you want it to be an integer value or a floating point value, you need to later convert it using this int and float keywords. Okay, and then we have seen how you can get multiple values using a space or a custom separator like comma or something. You can do that as well using this dot split method, and then you can extract those values in separate variables and you can print it later. And then we have also seen, after this custom separated, how to create this list from the values provided by the user, similar to what we have done here, but here we are creating a list out of this using this list comprehension. Again, that's okay if you don't understand this properly, we'll discuss in detail, but just remember that similarly, using the split method and a for loop, you can create a list out of this. And then we have seen how you can validate a user's input. When we are expecting a number, they are actually providing a number. And if there's an error, we are checking if that error is happening and providing like the message of what went wrong there. So I hope everyone is clear of whatever we have discussed. And that is all from my side for today. I'll see you in the next upload. Thanks for watching.